Web 2.0.
Innovation.
Trend.
Collaboration.
Software.
Metadata.
Got the world turning as fast as it can? Hear how technology can help, legally speaking, with two of the top legal technology experts, authors, and lawyers, Dennis Kennedy and Tom Mighell. Welcome to the Kennedy-Mighell Report here on the Legal Talk Network.
And welcome to episode 238 of the Kennedy-Mighell Report. I'm Dennis Kennedy in Ann Arbor.
And I'm Tom Mighell in Dallas. Before we get started, we'd like to thank our sponsors.
First of all, thanks to Text Expander for sponsoring our show. Communicate smarter with Text Expander. Gather, perfect, and share your knowledge. Recall your best words instantly and repeatedly. Learn more at textexpander.com/podcast.
And we'd also like to thank ServeNow, a nationwide network of trusted, pre-screened process servers. Work with the most professional process servers who have experience with high-volume serves, embrace technology, and understand the litigation process. Visit servenow.com to learn more.
Well, in our last episode, we talked about Tom's notion of digital mindfulness as opposed to digital sabbaticals, detoxes, and just plain quitting social media and digital altogether. I was personally happy to work in a Marie Kondo reference before Tom did in that episode. In this episode, however, we want to take a look at the implications of how easy it has become to fake photos, to fake video, and to fake other data, and how it will probably get even easier, and how that might impact you and also the practice of law. Tom, what's all on our agenda for this episode?
Well, Dennis, in this edition of the Kennedy-Mighell Report, we will indeed be discussing deep fakes, fake photos, fake videos, other types of fakes, and how we think the technologically competent lawyer might need to think about them and get prepared. In our second segment, we're going to reply to some comments about our digital mindfulness episode. Remember that we love comments. We encourage you to send them to us either by email or by our phone line, which we'll talk about at the end, our voicemail. And as usual, we'll finish up with our parting shots, that one tip, website, or observation that you can start to use the second that this podcast is over. But first up, deep fakes. That's a term. It's a real term. It's something that really exists. But what's interesting is it seems like only yesterday we were talking about fake news, and now that seems kind of like old news because deepfakes have a potential to be a much bigger problem. They are fake photos, fake videos, fake audio that is starting to show up all over the place. And what's interesting is that artificial intelligence is playing a role in this phenomenon. Dennis, what made you think that now was the time to start talking about the deepfake issue?
Well, there were two things, and they're sort of like the opposite ends of the spectrum. So one was, I saw this thing on Twitter where somebody had taken the Mona Lisa and used this AI programming to turn it into a smiling video. And that's sort of the tip of the iceberg of what people are starting to do with video. So that was on the one end. On the other, our friend Craig Ball had a recent post about the war for e-discovery being over, and that e-discovery education needs to focus on the basics. And he was sort of bemoaning the fact that conferences went to these very esoteric e-discovery issues instead of focusing on the basics. And so I think that it's that sort of continuum that got me thinking, Tom, because I feel that lawyers especially look at this world of email and documents, and there's all these other things going on where there's more video, there's more audio, there's more photos, and we used to say, the picture was the proof, but we can't rely on that anymore. And in fact, we probably couldn't have relied on it for at least the past maybe 30 years, but we have. But now, as you said, you can do even more. So it really leads you to question how much confidence you have in what you see, and then what you need to know to determine whether something can be relied on. So that's what got me thinking about this, Tom.
I want to take a quick detour and veer off into Craig Ball's post a minute, because I'm not totally sure. I guess when you put it the way that you put it, that that things are moving into more esoteric topics. He did mention that some of these conferences are talking more about AI and blockchain and other things that are not really strictly related to e-discovery, but are more interesting offshoots. I read that article in a slightly different way, that initially I didn't catch the connection you were making with it. And I totally agree that we're moving beyond documents, and that's why we're talking about the whole deep fake issue today. I don't think I agree that the focus on email and documents may be misplaced. I think that there's still plenty of room there. What I saw Craig's article, and this is my quick detour, and we'll come right back to deepfakes in a second, is that his article is really making the point that this is something that happens, I think, that when new regulations appear, when new rules appear to deal with something, industry inevitably turns its attention to minimizing it, to figuring out how can we not have to do all this stuff. Instead of complying with discovery rules and learning how to do things, let's figure out how to make the problem go away in the first place. Let's figure out how to utilize proportionality to make sure that we're doing the right thing. Here's how to, negotiate things so we don't have to produce anything at all. I totally get his point, and I think that is, to me, one of the bigger issues. I think it's going to happen with privacy the same way that it's happened with e-discovery. I don't know that it's totally related to this subject. I guess I come back to you and say, Dennis, I don't see the connection, although I totally agree with Craig's point.
Well, no, Craig's post has a lot of depth to it. And in a way, I'm creating a sort of fake post, if you will, by emphasizing what I chose to emphasize. But I think that there is, when I hear lawyers talk about what they're doing in e-discovery, you're right. They're trying to avoid the difficult issues. And what I'm saying is that when you think about that, and you're saying, oh, there are all these difficult things out there like AI and blockchain, and why can't we just focus on the basics? What this came back to me is says like, hey, there's some basics out there that are being called into question, and probably will even more so. And what assumptions are we allowed to make, and what gives us the confidence that something we're looking at, which used to be kind of the gold standard, they're saying, if you don't have a selfie of it or you don't have a photo of it, it didn't happen. Now the question is, if you do have that photo, how can you be sure that it happened? So I think that to me part of what this is with the fake photos is saying, okay, what is it that we can rely on? What do we need to do about that? But if my technology competence is in sort of the basics of e-discovery, how broad does that have to be? Because I think you do need to know something about photos and videos that's probably beyond what most lawyers expect these days.
Well, and I think we're 100% back on track. I think that the whole deep fake issue and the idea of being able to fake photos and videos has elevated photos and videos from what we would have thought as basic, to complicated and to potentially a big problem in litigation and as part of evidentiary consideration. So, I totally agree with you there. So, do we want to start kind of with, I hate to say it, with the basics of deep fakes and kind of how easy it is to get it done, and then kind of move into the more complicated stuff?
Well, let's just talk about some super basic stuff. So I sort of think about it's just how easy it is these days on your phone to take a picture and then edit it, enhance it, filter it, crop it, and do other things with it, just on your phone when you're taking, right after you've taken that picture. So it's just kind of like swipe, do this, do that. And you have a completely different photo than what's there that's happened. And it's so incredibly easy. And that's just the basics. And then Tom, I think as you step it up a level, you're talking about, you're going to the Photoshop and the more detailed editing things where you can almost make magic happen.
Yes, using Photoshop to alter an image is often successful, but I would say that depending on your skill using it, it may not come across that way. It may not be as easy. I think we're going to find the same with some of these deepfakes that we're going to talk about. But I think that a lot of it depends on the talent of the person who is doing it. And I think the real fear that we should have is that somebody really talented gets a hold of some software and some tools that are really advanced and starts to make things that are really believable, but also completely fake. I think that's where we have the problem. I think that when you're dealing with tools like the things on your smartphone, to a certain extent Photoshop, it's easier to tell fakes that way than it is in some of these new methods that we're talking about with using artificial intelligence, which we'll talk a little bit later. I think that it makes it difficult, but I haven't, to be quite honest, Photoshop's been around a long time. We don't hear a lot of stories. I'm not aware of any, frankly. There may be some, but any stories where Photoshopped pictures were used as evidence in cases. I just don't hear that sort of thing is happening. And so even though that's relatively maybe not simple, but anyone can get Photoshop, anyone can use it, so it's available to anybody, I would think that we'd be seeing more of that happening if it were really something that could be successful.
Well, I think so. We rely on a couple things. So one is we have our ethical rules, which would say it's totally wrong to use Photoshop in a bad way. But it's not that far of a stretch from saying, let's just make this a little more clear and let's take this out of the picture and let's change the lighting here just to make it look better, to actually really distorting the story. And so there's sort of two developments that I think have happened that or are happening that have really brought this into play. So one is that you tend to see, or I've seen in the last year or so, in this highly partisan world we live in, that photojournalists have kind of hurt their cause because they will have this an image that's very affecting, very emotional, sort of like the classic photojournalist photo, and then there would be people at the scene who kind of clicked the whole setup and showed the whole scene. You see that it was really cropped and done in a way that really distorted what was happening there. So we've lost confidence, I think, in some of the traditional photography. Then I think this other thing that's just starting to happen, and Tom, I always have the sense you're more of a camera person than I am, but the new cameras are talking about just grabbing all the data about a scene that would be in the image, almost as if there's not like the actual image that you start with, and then you create it from all that data. So this raw data. And so there was this notion that instead of just mirroring the scene or capturing the scene, as a photographer, you're starting to create what the scene would be with the data there. So you can make things look better, sharper, all those things. And again, it becomes, as the technology happens in photos, then I think there's a certain amount of editing and changing that we're going to start to take for granted, and there is this line that we need to be aware of. And then you would also want to say, like, how do I know if somebody's using Photoshop? Like you said, I'm not aware of anything either, but that part of that reason is that people don't know how to trace that. So just a couple things happening out there before we get the video even that are changing our approach to how much we rely on photos.
Well, and I'll say, you bring up the ethical rules as a potential barrier. I wasn't even thinking about lawyers altering photos. I was thinking about clients bringing photos that have been altered. I mean, I think that to me stands the better chance of bringing a photo a digital photo to a lawyer and saying, here's what happened. I can see that happening more often than the lawyer. But I will say, I've been in positions where lawyers have taken videos in the past. I mean, it doesn't need any fancy technology. You shoot the scene or you take the photo to best advantage your position. And that's something that lawyers have been doing forever. And I think there's a difference, though, between advantaging your position and making it in the best light and faking something that wasn't there. I think those are two very different things. You're very true about the abilities of cameras, and I'm thinking more of smartphone cameras these days, because for the best example really is the Google Pixel phone. The camera, the hardware on a Pixel phone is not any better than any other camera in any other phone, any iPhone or anything else, but it's generally considered that the software on the Pixel phone is really what makes the camera so good. It takes in all the information, it decides how it wants to compose the picture and provide it in the most pleasing delivery of pixels as it can to show the right picture. And I think when we give over that much control to the software, there's all sorts of things that can happen. So maybe let's transfer a little bit now and talk about video. And I think the same ideas are going to apply. But what you really have with video that's making it different, something that is, I imagine it's happening with photos too, but it's going to happen more often with video because you need something smarter than software to do this. Is instead of sitting in Photoshop and manually setting up a revised video, you're actually artificial intelligence is actually taking it to a new level, and you're training an artificial intelligence to change a video for you. And in many cases, and as you see by that Mona Lisa, pretty realistically, doing something that actually looks like the Mona Lisa is smiling. Now, there are some examples of fake videos that aren't quite this sophisticated. They aren't using artificial intelligence. At the time that we were recording this episode, there was a video circulating of the Speaker of the House who appeared to be drunk and slurring her words. And it was pointed out and kind of debunked rather quickly that they'd basically taken that video and slowed it down just enough to make it look like it was still going in regular time, but slow enough to where it did look like she was slurring her words. And so some are sophisticated and some are less sophisticated. I think artificial intelligence makes the possibility that there are going to be more sophisticated videos that are capable of popping up in the future.
So a couple things. So one is, time I remember, God, it was probably like 10 years ago, we were being videoed and we had a script that you and I were following, and I can't remember if we were reading it or we had memorized it, but someone was taking video of us, and I did like this whole long thing, and I messed up the very last sentence, and you were running late to something, so I irritated you more than even usual by doing this. And I'm thinking, this is like audio. I just do the last sentence over, and we had to do the whole thing because you couldn't splice the video together in quite that way without a very sophisticated arrangement. So I sort of feel what's different is, and I don't know whether it's AI, but we do have all these tools out there, and I would call them like, they give you this ability to do smoothing, is what I think of it is, so that you can say, I can do something with video where it's not herky-jerky like we think with film, but it's very smooth. And so I can speed things up, slow things down, do a little distortion, maybe doing something even more so than that, like you said, with the Speaker of the House. And it's just not noticeable. And so I think that aspect of the video editing technology, and then you put that together with CGI, where we could create this whole thing in front of a green screen to have somebody appear as if they were a place they weren't, it just raises all kinds of questions. And then to touch back on the thing you were saying, that there does become this concern when you think about it, that you have a client who's bringing you a photo or a video, and especially if it shows like a spouse with someone they're alleged to be having an affair with, let's say, and it's very obvious the two people are in the same picture, and then you find out later that the person has been photoshopped in from something else, or something else has been taken out of that picture. So that's interesting, but I think that's all this video editing technology has now kind of changed what's possible and how we notice it less, I guess, when we watch.
Well, and one of the more interesting sites that came up in the past 6 or so months is if you just go in and Google, or just actually go to thispersondoesnotexist.com, you'll be presented with a photo, and you refresh the screen and it's a new photo. Every time you refresh the screen, none of those photos are of real people. Those are photos that were generated using artificial intelligence. And some of them you can see a little bit. I mean, some of them are not absolutely perfect, but most of them are close enough. And the environment in which their faces appear, like maybe as part of a group photo, some of the details make it look real to you. Whether it's real or not, they've managed to make the photo look real. I think that for evidentiary purposes, I think that it's really could be a huge issue. I mean, so far there hasn't been that video that really has done it. It has been fake information that has really alter the public's trust in video or photos as evidence. But frankly, one single convincing video could make it very difficult in the future for us to trust what we see on the news, what we see in the courtroom. And I think that it's really kind of a worrying situation because the tools are getting better and because the people who can wield those tools are probably getting smarter at using them. So I guess, Dennis, how do you fight against it? How do you show something's fake? What are lawyers supposed to do to make sure that the evidence that gets put in against them isn't a fake video or a fake photo?
Well, and this is where I think the whole technology competence notion comes in. So you would say, what do I need to learn? Who do I have to engage? Do I need a forensics person? What are the telltale signs? I would think as a minimum that would be one thing that you're looking at. What's the chain of custody, which we may talk about in a little bit more in a second time. But I think you go into some of those things where you say, what is it that I really need to know? And then to become aware of just what you can do yourself. Like it's pretty amazing how just with the simple editing tools on your smartphone, you can not only create a better picture and filter things so it looks different, but you can crop things and do other things. Take people out of shots, and it's super easy, and it changes the information that comes from that. And I sort of think that as a profession, and probably the courts as well, need to kind of step back and say, okay, what's in these situations, like who should have the burden of proof on showing that something's fake or that it's real? Does that change given sort of the background and circumstances of what's going on in a case? Is it different in civil versus criminal? I mean, like a fake video in a criminal case could have devastating consequences. So I think there's a whole range of things that technology has moved out, once again, way ahead of where the law is. And it's going to be difficult. But I think the lawyers who could kind of step up to this are going to have, once again, as they had in the early days of e-discovery, they're going to have a big advantage.
I agree. And there are a couple of other things that I was thinking about could be used to show that something's fake. Some of these lawyers can use today. Some of these may be coming in the future to help lawyers to the extent that they need it. One of the ideas would be if you're looking at a photo, it's possible that photo was taken from something that's already available out on the internet. And there are reverse image search engines where you can plug that photo in and it'll go look for similar images and bring them back. You may be able to find a fake that way. That's happening today. Sometimes magnification of that image can show differences. One of the things that the government is doing, that the Defense Department is working a lot on deepfakes, and right now they are actually, if you can use AI to create a deepfake, then why not use AI to detect a deepfake? And what they're doing is they're feeding them real videos, they're comparing them against fakes, and they're training them to spot the differences. And it turns out that those differences tend to be around the edges of the face, where they, you put somebody's face on another person. There are digital errors around the edges of the face that are hard to smooth over completely. And an AI can detect it where a human doesn't necessarily have the ability. One thing that is very difficult in a fake video is lip syncing, is getting the actual motion of the words down correctly. And so that may be one way to tell a fake. It's been suggested that some fakes can be detected using forensics. Dennis, you mentioned is forensics right. Just like an electronic document has its own unique hash identifier, photos and videos ought to have metadata that could be examined to determine if it was real or if it had been altered somehow. One potential fix that I heard about was that you could embed some type of cryptography into cameras that would make it relatively simple to verify footage. Obviously, you'd have to make that a standard. All cameras would need to have that sort of thing, so I don't know that that's ever something that's going to gain traction, but it's one way to verify against fakes. I think we ought to consider all of these as open options until we kind of figure out what needs to happen. But I think that the bottom line, like you say, is lawyers who know about this and who are thinking about ways to protect against it already have a leg up on the situation.
Well, and then you do have a lot of photos have date, time stamps, location information, which raises its own set of privacy issues. So we do have that balance that's taking place. It's possible, I think, that you're looking at a chain of custody issue in some of these things. So if you said we have it's like a body cam from a police officer, we want to know that nothing happened to that. When you're talking chain of custody, Tom, you potentially have a blockchain use case over time to give some kind of certainty that something hasn't been altered. So there are some things out there, but I think we really are at the basics. And if if somebody's listening to this and said, "Oh, I deal with photos all the time in cases," and you're not aware of some of these editing tools, some of these developments, the metadata associated with photographs, it should be the wake-up call to say, hey, this is something I really need to get on top of because it's going to happen, and there are bad actors out there, and we know that. I have no doubt that in the election in 2020, we're going to hear a lot of talk about videos and photos being faked. So we all need to become much more aware of that. So I don't know, Tom. I think this is an area where, with technology and law come together, there are new career opportunities. So there could be some interesting things that happen here for people who really like this stuff. I think some new career options, whether it's forensics, whether it's some aspect of law, but some things opening up there. So that's my thought. I guess, Tom, if you can wrap up, but my thought is that this is really a building issue that we're probably not paying enough attention to. And maybe it does need to start to at least spend a few minutes or one class in an e-discovery course on photography and video would be useful for today's lawyers.
Yep, I'm actually going to head in a non-technology-based direction to wrap this up in, which is one area that may prove effective is, it's one thing that ethical rules prevent lawyers from doing things like this. It's another thing if you criminalize the practice. So if you say that if you're introducing evidence that is fake, then that is a crime that you could be punished for. Back a number of years ago, when I was a younger lawyer in Texas, there was a group here that basically had set up their own courts and had their own judgments that, while they weren't doing anything but just having their own hearing at the airport Holiday Inn, it wasn't causing a lot of problems. But then they actually started filing these fake judgments with the county clerk, and they became liens when that happened. And it caused lots of people lots of problems to have to deal with those liens. And the minute that the legislature criminalized filing fake documents in court, it stopped completely. They stopped doing it. It never happened at all. And this is just a different kind of fake. So maybe criminalizing it also would help. Although this is a technology podcast, don't count on that happening. So make sure you do what you need to do to keep up with the latest technology on this issue. All right, before we go to our next segment, let's take a quick break for a message from our sponsors.
Looking for a process server you can trust? ServeNow.com is a nationwide network of local pre-screened process servers. ServeNow works with the most professional process servers in the industry, connecting your firm with process servers who embrace technology, have experience with high-volume serves, and understand the litigation process and rules of properly effectuating service. Find a pre-screened process server today. Visit www.servenow.com.
Text Expander is a productivity multiplier. Lawyers love Text Expander because with a short abbreviation or search while typing, Text Expander can produce cover emails for invoices or signing instructions, insert templates for consistent meeting notes, perform accurate date math on the fly, and instantly present things you retype all the time. Text Expander runs on Macs, iPhones, iPads, and Windows and works in any application. Visit textexpander.com/podcast for 20% off your first year.
And now let's get back to the Kennedy-Mighell Report. I'm Tom Mighell.
And I'm Dennis Kennedy. We love getting comments and questions from our listeners about our show. Our friend Steve Embry listened to our digital mindfulness episode and wrote a blog post called "You Disagree with Kennedy and Mighell? Are You Out of Your Mind?" That was the actual title. Our running gag on the show is that Tom and I always start out trying to disagree with each other on the topic, and then we end up on the same page. Well, except for maybe blockchain and Google. So we thought we'd reply to Steve's post in this segment, and we thank him for writing the post. So Tom, digital mindfulness was your idea. Can Steve possibly have anything to disagree with us about?
Well, and Steve, you're welcome to send in a voicemail at the number we're going to give you at the end here. But the way that I would interpret it is that Steve thought he disagreed with us, but I think he doesn't disagree with us. That's, I guess, the position that I'm going to take. And really what Steve says he really is comparing what we talk about, which is instead of going cold turkey, that you should, find other ways to reduce your use of technology. And we talked about using some helpful tools on both iPhones and Android phones that can help you do that. Steve's solution is that he completely unplugs every Sunday, and it's just a day without tech. And he enjoys that, and it frees him up, and it helps him connect with his family. And that's his method of the detox. And when I think about that, to me, that doesn't feel like the detox that I hear others talk about, which is unplugging for a long period of time and going cold turkey for much longer than a day. To me, a day it doesn't feel like a detox. It feels like a break, and it could be just a health break for that. And there's nothing wrong with that, in my opinion. And I think what his point was, and what it really revealed to me, is there's really no one size fits all for how you unplug from technology. You do what works for you. If taking a day off makes sense, then take the day off. If using one of these apps to understand how you use it and adjusting your usage of technology accordingly, do that. I think my point in the podcast before is that totally unplugging for long periods of time doesn't necessarily benefit you if there are benefits to be had from technology that don't require you to be looking at your screen 100% of the time. So I will say I agree with him. I don't have a disagreement, and I wish I could totally unplug on Sundays as well. I don't do it as much as I should, but I say more power.
I'm going to agree with you, Tom. I think that
What?
Steve,
I'm shocked that that's happening.
He raises a good point, but I think it felt like it's one of those things where you go, I think this was what we were hoping would be the takeaway, is that this is very personal to people. And Steve has come up with this great approach. And I think if you feel more stressed by your digital life, then you're going to have to take a more aggressive approach. But Tom, you also know me that I hate this sort of, one size fits all, prescriptive, you can't do this, you can't do that, one true way of doing things, which usually just happens to be what the person telling you this or writing about this does, and they want you to adopt that as well. And so I think that's difficult. You do kind of have to step back. So like there are people say you should never look at an iPad or your smartphone in the bedroom, let alone in the bed. And you go like, I read at night and I read ebooks. That's a crazy notion. And so it's just kind of stepping back. But I would also say that if I'm on Facebook and I have people stalking me and it's truly unpleasant, then actually getting off of Facebook becomes an option. I would still probably address it by settings changes and stuff myself, but sort of the higher level of stress, I think the more aggressive that you want to be. And so I think that Steve has developed this sort of nice approach for him that works for him right now. But I don't know that works for everybody. But it's a good reminder to say there are many ways to come to terms with the different things that you do. I still go back to say I still feel that television gets, watching television gets a free pass on this from most people, that you spend a lot more time on TV than people are willing to admit. So now it's time for our parting shots. That one tip, website, or observation you can use the second this podcast ends. Tom, take it away.
All right. In the past week or so, there was a conference that basically debuted a whole, the latest in new laptop technology, and there were some crazy laptops that were done. But the one I'm going to talk about two things. One was talked about at this trade show, but the other one was not. The first one is the Asus ZenBook Pro Duo, and what's interesting about it is that it has this beautiful full screen, but then on the bottom where the keyboard should be, half of that is dedicated to the keyboard, but the upper half is actually an extension of the screen that you have below. So it's designed to be a kind of a second workspace. You can have things there that you refer to as you're working on a document above. You can move things from that workspace to the main monitor that you have on the laptop. But it is I think an ingenious use of space to create another monitor there that helps with things. I think it looks beautiful. I can't wait to see it when it comes out. It's just been announced, so it hasn't come out yet. But I'm excited about sort of the future of laptops by seeing what this does. In the same token, Microsoft is teasing a dual screen Surface device that really looks a little bit like a real notebook. It looks like it has kind of a coiled binding, and that you open it up and it's got a screen on either side, like a double Kindle or something like that. We are starting to see foldable devices come out that aren't quite living up to expectations, so I'm not sure if this is going to be exactly what we're looking for, but I got to tell you, I'm interested in new ways to have displays, and I think that Microsoft and Asus are doing some sort of interesting things here.
That's cool, because some of the things you're describing, especially with the two screens that are bound together like a notebook, there's always been drawings of that and people kind of playing with prototypes of that going back many years. And it's really cool that the technology has now reached this point where some of these things are actually very possible. And again, it goes to that whole personalization thing, where that might not be the right thing for me, but that is perfect. That could be perfect for somebody else. And it's great to have those options. So my parting shot goes back to something we've talked about in the past. And it's this site called If This Then That, IFTTT.com. And what it does is it allows you to set up these little, I don't know the word for it, but basically these little flows. In a way, it's an API, but it allows you to say, I would like to, if I like this on Twitter, then send a copy of it to my OneNote on my OneNote program. And I use that example specifically because I realized that I use Twitter and likes on Twitter as kind of this way to say, oh, here's some interesting stuff I might go back to, or I might like to scroll through that from time to time. So I use a tool called TweetDeck, and I thought this was something I'd be able to do easily. And maybe it is if I kind of dig into the instructions, but it wasn't for me. And I was thinking about if this, then that. And there's this little, I guess they might call them recipes, but it just says, hey, take a Twitter like and send it to OneNote. And so I just do that, and I, log in, give my login credentials to Twitter, my login credentials to OneNote, and then anytime I like something in Twitter, it goes to a little notebook called Twitter in OneNote, and then I have it all in one place. And it's just like, it's this great little thing that it made me just want to go through if this, then that, and just find everything I could that would make my life just a tiny little bit easier. So that's what I liked.
The best and the worst thing about things like If This Then That are that there are so many tools there that can make your life easier. It drives me crazy going through all of them. There's just so many things to look at. I can never decide what to do. So that wraps it up for this edition of the Kennedy-Mighell Report. Thanks for joining us on the podcast. You can find show notes for this episode at tkmreport.com. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to our podcast in iTunes or on the Legal Talk Network site, where you can find archives of all of our previous podcasts. If you'd like to suggest a topic, please visit us at bit.ly/2 capital Q, capital N, WH, capital Z, U. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can reach out to us on LinkedIn, or as I've said, and I promised I would give you that voicemail number, it's 720-441-6820. That's 720-441-6820. We'd love to hear your voice. So until the next podcast, I'm Tom Mighell.
And I'm Dennis Kennedy, and you've been listening to the Kennedy-Mighell Report, a podcast on legal technology with an internet focus. If you like what you heard today, please rate us in Apple Podcasts, and we'll see you next time for another episode of the Kennedy-Mighell Report on the Legal Talk Network.
Thanks for listening to the Kennedy-Mighell Report. Check out Dennis and Tom's book, The Lawyer's Guide to Collaboration Tools and Technologies, Smart Ways to Work Together, from ABA Books or Amazon. And join us every other week for another edition of the Kennedy-Mighell Report, only on the Legal Talk Network.